let me go ahead and put that up on the screen here. And this is what it says. Then the word tells us, or is this the one? Yeah, yes, I believe this is the one. Then the word tells us that God breathed into Adam the breath of life, and man became a living soul. There came a time when God made man. The word tells us he made man's body of the substance of the earth. See Genesis 2:7. He made man, the word says, in his own image. In the image of God created he him, Genesis 1:27. Not just in the form that God was, but God breathed into him his own self, his own being, that heavenly materiality of which God consists. He injected or breathed himself into the man, and the man then became a composition of that heavenly substance or materiality and earth, or the substance of earth. So he was a very similar to what you would hear from Hagen or Copeland. But there are in this, I've got several John G. Lake books, and that's, from one of his sermons. But there are several sermons where he talks like that.
This definitely brings back some memories. My first thinking is obviously Isaiah 43:10, where it's talked about, before me, no God, none,
Yeah.
none whatsoever
Yeah.
was formed, nor shall there be any after. We also see in Peter's letter to First Timothy, talking about that there is one God, one mediator. And so when you bring up John G. Lake, it firstly brings up a memory that I had with a female family member who is a supposed apostle. And something that I found pretty interesting that I see even to this day is they're relaying all of these things that John G. Lake did. It was the Ebola virus situation, and he was doing all these miracles across continents. And then it was just this little touch and go. Let's talk about it, but move on. Then there was a whole issue with the other woman, but he always did, these amazing miracles, blah, blah, blah. Like at that point, you're like, okay, we're talking about somebody that is no longer above reproach,
Exactly.
that is disqualified, that he's having a seance in order to validate his new relationship. And so it's like, well, we're just going to touch on that and move on. There's a drastic difference between, something that's just a small error or a misunderstanding versus something like that. And we see so many of those situations surfacing in the church now. But what I was going to touch on that I haven't really talked much about in the past is a different memory. So before I got saved, I actually lived in a New Age commune. It was called the Chapel of Light in Brooksville, Florida. And it was heavily, heavily New Age, to the point of there was a lot of witchcraft stuff going on there. I ended up there because I had immigrated from England. I've been homeless 3 or 4 times. I didn't have anywhere to go. And so that's where I ended up. Just like these really nice people. They would have like a coffee shop type gathering on Friday nights. Musicians would come and all that. Well, I didn't realize at first it's actually a church on Sundays. And, I couldn't sit with my arms crossed because that would cover up, my spirit being, in order to allow the chanting to come into my spirit. So a lot of this stuff is, in short, surrounded around this notion of Christ consciousness, that you are the Christ that is a part of the consciousness of the universe. And not to get too depraved, but this is being run by a woman. She's leading this whole thing, who is an intimacy surrogate. So if a married couple is having intimacy issues, she will actually perform intimacy with the husband, and then she would give her counseling from that point. So it's just like this really depraved thing, and they are talking about the same things, that you are thinking things into existence, speaking things, that you are attuned to the infinite because you are recycled back into affinity and eternity. And so you hear all of these things that push all of this. But then when you take Christianity and you just look at it for what it is and what the Bible says, it dissipates and destroys all of that by saying, no, there's one God and there will only be one God. It's not surprising to see all of these things throughout history that are trying to dispel that.
Yep. You're absolutely right, brother. So any closing thoughts, any thoughts, about what we've talked about before we close out?
Yes, sir. Well, just first and foremost, a big thank you to you and your lovely wife. I'm so blessed to be able to communicate with people like yourselves and Kozar, Chris Roseborough, his son Josh. The whole family is amazing. It's funny. Maybe I'm speaking ignorantly here. I would like to think not, but the discernment community that we have here on YouTube isn't all that big. It's either you know the people or you know someone that knows them pretty well. And so I'm just so grateful not only to be able to come on here and talk about these things, because I feel like we could talk about this stuff for days. But I'm grateful to you and your wife for speaking into my life and helping me just look at the Bible contextually and to learn how to handle it rightly. And so kind of leaning from that is if there's somebody that watches this video that is ex Word of Faith, or maybe thinking about leaving Word of Faith, or is in Word of Faith, just a couple of things real quick that I kind of like to touch on is that, you don't have to believe us. You don't have to just kind of swallow what we're teaching, because I feel like a lot of people have been through that process in the Word of Faith. But just get your heart to a place where you're willing to test. Just be teachable, and that you're going to be testable. Put somebody's teaching to the test and learn. Exegesis it's almost like a life-saving term in and of itself. If you understand biblical exegesis, you don't have to be this massive pro at it. It's just, even if you have like a little bicep exegesis or a little tricep exegesis, and you can apply it and just get to thinking that way, it's going to save you from so many errors and so many pitfalls that we see in the Word of Faith. So that would just be my invitation, is just get to where you can objectively test what somebody's saying. And that's what the Word tells us to do in 1 John 4:1, Ephesians 5:11, John 7:24, to judge righteously. And then the other thing is, just real quick, is that I see a lot of people on my channel that I'm just so blessed to be in this community of people that have suffered through spiritual abuse. When we're in these churches, we open up ourselves to the most intimate, deep, and important parts of our being, our spirits. And we're opening up to these people and these teachings. And when you come out of this stuff, it's a legitimate PTSD. People are angry, they're traumatized, they're depressed, they feel woeful and horrible. And so my invitation, if that's something that you're struggling with or scared of or feeling, is that that is a process where healing does take place. It often takes time to unlearn habits, to unlearn teachings. But through that, Christ is fully capable. He is fully sovereign to bring light from darkness. And you, unfortunately, we wouldn't want, somebody to go through such trauma and such despair to get to this point. But being at that point, you do then have a silver lining, in that you have a beautiful testimony that then you can share with other people who are going through trauma, who have been through that trauma, that spiritual abuse, that you can then share with them and point to a freeing, powerful biblical king who is beautiful beyond anything that Copeland can sell you. So I'm just so grateful to you. I love you, brother, and to your lovely wife. And I'm very, very appreciative that you would have me on here.
Well, I thank you so much, Dan. And we were talking in the beginning, and I was talking to Robin when I first met you and talked to you on the telephone. And I told you this before, but I think it's worth repeating to the audience that the very first time we talked on the phone, it was like I knew you. There was no awkwardness. It was just, we just had such a great conversation. And I am so appreciative of you and your work. Appreciate all that you've done. And folks, if you have not checked Daniel's channel out, you need to do that. His documentaries are stellar, and he's got some really good stuff about his testimony on there you need to see. There he goes into a lot more detail than he did here in this episode. So, Danny, thank you so much for joining me. It's a real blessing to have you on the channel.
I'm honored. Thank you.
All right, folks, thank you so much for watching. And again, as Danny said, if you know anyone at all who has been hurt by the Word of Faith movement, pass this video along. I think it will be helpful to hear somebody who experienced it firsthand. So, Lord willing, we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.